But I'm really curious about your thoughts on methodology, because you've alluded to all of these interview-based studies, and I'm curious to know, and you've written about research methods and about qualitative methods, and I'm curious to know how that has, again, kind of just evolved in your own work. What do you see as the kind of the value of qualitative methods? How do you see their sort of role and status in psychology? Maybe you could just talk a little bit about how you've used them, what you see as their role, and so on.
I love qualitative methods. I certainly, when I think about the studies that I love and that I have learned from my own and other people's, I mean, there are definitely quantitative studies. One just published in Science, which shows that if you look at statistics on how well high school girls, I think 8th grade girls and boys do on mathematics tests in many countries around the world. In most, but not all countries, boys do better. In Iceland, girls do better. And girls dominate the top 1%. It's not. It's,
that's
take that, Steven Pinker and Larry Summers.
Yeah.
But they also looked simultaneously at a variable, or a couple of variables about women's status in those societies, some of which was how much are women paid in relation to men, some of which were attitudinal questions that were asked to the general population. If jobs are scarce, do you think that you should give, that men should have first dibs on those jobs? So countries, of course, differ very much on these variables as well, and they are gorgeously correlated with women's math scores. If Singapore looked like Iceland in terms of the attitudes and the roles and the rights of women in those places, Singapore girls would score like Iceland girls. So there is tremendous place for exquisite quantitative research, and I love it. A lot of the things the studies that I guess I have learned the most from many have been qualitative. Some of them, I think my favorite technique is really participant observation. I think of my favorite studies of all time, Elliot Lebo's Tally's Corner, Carol Stack's All Our Kin. Studies that really give you a sense of how life is lived. And Robert Weiss, whose research I adore, also said, I think it was Bob Weiss who said, ask me no questions, I'll tell you no lies. That even interviewing, because you get people to frame and make it sound nice, you're intervening. Being with them, hanging out. I mean, I think the moments when I was walking around the housing project with my respondent, meeting some of her neighbors, and those were some of the most illuminating moments to me. I think there are issues of when and where you do. What's the state of knowledge? The reason that we did the qualitative, not entirely qualitative, but partially qualitative study on poor women and depression was that there had been quantitative studies that isolated this population. But from there, where do you go? How do you then write a forced choice questionnaire? I think we were correct to say the state of knowledge does not allow us to write a good forced choice questionnaire. What we really need is some in-depth groundwork, that earlier phase. And I, of course, am bothered that there is not more respect for qualitative research, that it's so very difficult to publish, that and that this first step is just missing from so many research endeavors and from the training of so many students. So I think that is a shame. I do, and of course qualitative research varies enormously, and I think probably, well, just as you need an exquisite methodologist to design an exquisite quantitative study, you need some kind of a really special person to carry out qualitative research that is illuminating. And there's bad stuff out there. I assigned my students one paper, which actually I would like to have loved it. Written by a black man about why, tackling the issue of why in poor neighborhoods some kids are dropping out of school and particularly getting pregnant, having babies when they're not married. And it's qualitative. There's all these long interview segments that he gets from his respondents. And the paper just nagged at me and nagged at me because I felt that it presented a horrifying vision of these young people. Talked about baby clubs in which young girls are showing off their babies in the pretty clothes, and that they actually try to sleep with handsome guys because then their baby will be prettier. I mean, it just presented them as utterly materialistic, soulless, and just awful people that you would never want to meet. And I thought, could this be true? And then I went back and looked over the paper. Every single one of the quotations that he gives you is not by someone who's had a baby. It's by the upstanding young women in the neighborhood who look down upon these other girls and are telling you about this.
Wow.
So you have there the illusion that you have been brought into understanding. It's all the trappings of a qualitative study, and yet all you have got is more external observers heaping scorn and contempt on these people, and I think probably quite unfairly so. I think, just as we discovered, a decade later, that those black boys that were accused of wilding and raping and nearly killing that Central Park jogger never did it. Someone else entirely. I think some of these, but you have these horrifying images of very poor people that stick in your mind, and I think that paper is a net loss for society because it plants very firmly these horrible images and gives you the notion that you somehow understand the interior workings, and I don't think you do.
Right.
So I think qualitative methodology can be abused. I think quantitative methodology has its limitations.